Welcome to the Red Beard Embodiment Podcast. I am your host, Alex Greene, and I'm on a mission to bring the power of embodiment to people all around the world. In this podcast, we explore how embodiment practices, trauma healing, and knowledge about the human nervous system can help us find our ground, discover new sources of meaning, and create connection in an ever-changing world. The deepest change is embodied change. All right. Well, I am, good morning, everyone. And I am excited to be sitting down today with Hans Holter Solhjell. He's in Norway, so it's not morning for Hans, but here it is for me here in Boulder, Colorado. And Hans and I we share a connection through the TRE tension and trauma release community. Hans is a global trainer based in Norway, and so he's a certification trainer, as is myself. And I think we've only met in person one time, and that was in Dubrovnik, Croatia, a few years back for a global summit. But we've had the chance to connect remotely several times over the course of these years. And one thing that we also share in common is Hans is a Somatic Experiencing Practitioner and a Feldenkrais Practitioner, both of things that are common in my own training and explorations as well. And lastly, Hans has a Master's of Science in Educational Science, and does work with communication and conflict resolution with children and families in the context of schools and kindergartens. And so we're going to touch a little bit about that in today's conversation around how nervous system regulation work is important when it comes to conflict resolution and communication, and especially with children. So anyway, Hans, I've been looking forward to this, and I'm really happy we're sitting down today.
Thank you very much, Alex, for inviting me. I'm honored to be here and looking forward to this conversation.
Great. Wonderful. Well, usually how I like to begin, Hans, is sort of like an origin story. My perspective is not too many of, any one of us who has found our way to nervous system work or somatic work or trauma work. It didn't happen just randomly because we signed up for that in our university studies. I think there's always a story behind it. And so I wonder if we could go into that for you a little bit. Well, what are some of the influences that led you down the road to the professional work you're doing now?
I did have an interest in relationships and psychology and so on quite early, I think. And read about this in magazines and so on. And but I also had a very clear sense that something did not work well for me on an emotional level and also relationally. I had a lot of tension in my body. I also had a lot of social anxiety, especially even as a child and also later in my teenage years. Mm. And I also developed a quite severe stutter as well. And then at some point in my sort of early 20s, I got very interested in figuring this out, trying to understand what was going on and maybe see if something could be done about it. It really started out even before that, when I started my university studies. I became interested in the sort of topic of learning to learn, learning how to learn. I found that very fascinating. I was actually studying something completely different, actually law. I did that for a couple of years, but changed from that to 1 year of psychology studies at the university here, and then after that to educational science, where I finally did complete a master's degree in that. But as a student in that period at university, I had a lot of several experiences that made me very interested in the body. And especially I did read a book by Tony Buzan and Michael Gelb about juggling, the lessons in life from the art of juggling, at that point, I had also been doing Aikido for some time. And both of these sort of experiences, or the experience from Aikido, was very important, because in Aikido we also do quite a lot of meditation, both sitting and standing. So that was my first experience of sort of meditating and being aware of myself, observing my breathing, and I became very aware that my breathing was very choppy, very restricted, and did not flow naturally at all. And I made a connection with this and my stuttering. And I sort of like a mix of these different interests, learning how to learn, the Aikido, reading this book about, so where they talk about, in this book about juggling, they also talk about Aikido, but also about Alexander technique, the Feldenkrais method. And they also mentioned Wilhelm Reich, I think. And they used this metaphor of the amoeba. If you look at the amoeba in a microscope, you will see that it's pulsating. So this is a well-known idea, of course, in TRE. But this is a age-old idea.
Right.
So and of course, TRE also have roots in Wilhelm Reich's work, as well as bioenergetics and so on.
Sure.
This idea of the amoeba that was pulsating, but if you poke the amoeba, now it will contract. And then if you let it alone for a while, it will gradually turn to this pulsating state and sort of revitalize again, we could say. And then, but if you poke it repeatedly and don't allow it to fully repair or fully come back to the full free flow of the contraction and expansion, the pulsation, it might become more permanently contracted, not able to regain the full vitality. And this idea very clearly spoke to me about what I was observing in myself and my body. So from that, and I did venture into many different directions of exploring different methods, body-oriented methods, more like cognitive-oriented methods, relational methods. I actually started off with a training in something called NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming, which in Norway has a special offshoot called communicology. And from that, I did the Feldenkrais method after that, the training in that. And later on, the training in somatic experiencing, and also the TRE training as well. So that was more maybe over a period of 25 years or close to 30 years now, because I'm now 52. So, but in that initial phase, I in the first 2 to 5 years, you could say, of course, there was a lot of figuring things out, trying to understand what was going on, how these different methods sort of could help me. And I also had this sense that a lot of the body work I did was very good, but it also created sometimes some type of internal pressure or increased tension in parts of me. And of course, this tension that increased, or the pressure that appeared, didn't come from the outside. They basically were already there on the inside, but maybe more spread out or held in different ways, or in certain freeze states or collapse states and so on. I can understand that now from the in the rearview mirror, you could say. But at that time, I had read about bioenergetics, Wilhelm Reich's work, also things like primal scream and so on. And I really had a sense that something related to that was going on in me. I had this sense of very strong internal pressure related to emotion, anger. I knew I had not been crying since I was 5, I think, sometime around that time. And so what I did was actually just lay down on the floor, put a big pillow over my head, and turn on some music, and sort of really
Right.
did some deep, intense screaming. And after that, there was no turning back, you could say, because that really, all the other methods really did help in many ways.
Sure.
But they could not help with this sort of increased pressure, increased tension that sort of appeared, and that sort of very deep, hidden or locked down emotional intensity. And only the sort of emotional release work did that, actually. So that, and then I could feel like a gradual, quite slow, but very gradual and definitely visible from day to day or week to week, definitely from month to month, and an improvement of our baseline, baseline self-regulation ability, or sort of increased vitality, reduced tension, improved breathing.
Very cool. Well, there's
voice,
I love the comparison and the analogy of the amoeba. And you're right that, we use that as an illustration in TRE. Sometimes we use the image of the jellyfish or sometimes the image of the amoeba. But I appreciate the comparison to the amoeba in terms of such a the most simplistic, animal life form. One cell, not a complex nervous system. It's all there's no muscle fibers in the same way that a human, or not only a human, but doesn't have the same physiological structures of muscle and neurons in the same way that mammals and more multicellular organisms have, but that all of the basic responses to life in terms of threat response, in terms of contraction, that still the simple behaviors of safety and what happens with the pulsation and with the amoeba when safety is present, and how the organism constricts under stress, threat, or the absence of safety. So I love that, taking things all the way down to the most simple single cellular organisms, that we can just draw those same comparisons about safety and resilience that you're pointing out. So I always say, with my TRE students, when we get to the slide that shows the pulsating jellyfish, and then in comparison with the pulsation of the respiration and the heart and the pulsations of the human organism, and I always say, if there is one slide that I want to sort of burn into your brain, it's this one, because we're going to talk a lot about neurophysiology and the dorsal vagal shutdown and the freeze immobilization response. And, we're going to talk about polyvagal theory, and we're going to become very technical about things. And we're going to talk about myofascial patterns and tension in the muscles. But at the end of the day, there's a much simpler way, when we sort of set the language of science aside. There's a much simpler way to look at what we're trying to do here. And what we're trying to do here is restore free pulsation and safety within the human organism, no different than any other animal or organism. So anyway, I'm really glad you brought up the amoeba as the image.
Yeah, it's a very powerful image, I think. And actually, I did in my master thesis use this image, because I've wrote about sort of a lot of the theory behind all of this, the things you talked about now, and described what we can call, or what I call, a contracting dynamic and an expanding dynamic. So how this sort of contraction gradually sort of happens more and more and more, and then of course how we can turn it around and create more of an expanding dynamic. So for me, that image was huge, very extremely powerful in terms of its effect both on my myself, but also my sort of professional thinking around these topics.
Yeah, interesting. So in that, as you shared your personal story to understand your own body, your own emotional system, your own, things like the social anxiety, and as you worked with yourself over with Aikido and Feldenkrais Somatic Experiencing TRE. And then this example you gave with the more overtly cathartic things like primal scream, and where, that for you, what was required was to tap into an underlying sense of release, kind of required something a little bit big. Can you just share a little bit more about that, about how and what you learned once you kind of crossed that threshold into, I don't know, I guess recognizing that there is that you need to get more deeply into yourself, you needed something more.
At that point, when I actually lay down on the floor and put a pillow over my head and turn out the music, up the music to allow really sound and sort of that pressure to release, or start releasing at least. I had at least 3 years, I think, of experience, both with meditation from the Aikido and other ways of meditating, because I did start exploring that.
Yeah.
And I also had done quite a bit of work with the Alexander technique, had quite a few sessions with that.
Right.
And also did at least some Feldenkrais work, as well as some other body-oriented methods as well. And I think we could say that all of these approaches have a kind of top-down type approach. Even though they're body-oriented, many think that immediately when we work with the body, it's somehow a bottom-up approach. If you want to use those terms, I mean, there are different ways of thinking about the brain and the neural system, but I find those terms useful still. And there definitely are ways of working with the body that are more oriented towards stabilizing, somehow calming down, and to have a sense of internal calm, or somehow down regulate, you could say. We could call it top down, if top down regulation from the upper part of the neural system, the cortex, you could say, or the prefrontal lobes, or whatever, how you want to put it into some neurological context. But when doing that, it somehow seemed to move things around inside, opening up some things, but then also intensifying some other things, maybe some layers of protection of the patterns in myself that I was using to sort of hide or hold thing in control in a different way than this sort of top-down control, more on an unconscious level, somehow got replaced by sort of this upper, sort of more conscious or more practiced, you could say, self-regulation and top-down methods, you could say. Which is actually a step forward, because it also, even though it was very intense with the internal pressure, even very painful, I developed even quite intense pain over my face and so on, with some, I'm not exactly sure about the exact mechanisms of that, but I did also some breathing, as I could feel inside the internal tubes that there were some sort of really deep contractions, while at the same time on the outer layers of myself I could feel very calm, very secure, very in sort of that sort of meditative Zen space, even walking around and being relational and so on. But I could also feel many times when my self-regulation capacity sort of broke down, certain immature or responses or fear responses or anxiety responses still sort of popped up through the through my newfound levels of self-regulation.
Right.
So there was clearly something that was going on some levels below what I could actually sort of down-regulate, and that were showing up. And and I found that it was not through more meditation, not through more body work, not through more cognitive processing, not through more relational work. All of that sort of is very important. So I'm not saying any of that is not good, or actually it's very important, I would say. And it also works very well together with something like TRE and other types of release work. But it could not take the place of working with the release and the sort of the more bottom-up auto-regulation type of work, where we open up to what is actually happening in the body and what the body sort of wants to do by itself, like tremoring, moving in different ways. It could be, there are lots of different ways we can actually work with release.
Right.
But and it's a completely different sort of access to something that is on a different level in oneself.
Right.
That cannot really in the same way be accessed through other methods.
Yeah. Super interesting. So, I mean, the way this kind of connects to my own journey or thoughts is, like slightly the opposite in one sense, in the sense of, like in my case, I came to TRE because, first having a spontaneous type of shaking experience when I went through some body work, and getting a sort of an early unsolicited experience, or, oh my gosh, wow, there's something underneath. There's something down in there that once it's stimulated, it has a life of its own, and I didn't know anything about it, but it felt very important. It felt very alive. It felt very deep and central to myself and my physiology. And so for me, one way or another, I had found myself to TRE, maybe a decade, in around 2014. So about a decade ago. And a huge part of my, exploration as a bodywork therapist, and then, like you, I did the somatic experiencing training to have a clear grasp of the principles of trauma and a more nuanced understanding of some of the nervous system theories being learned now. And TRE was just such a direct and central way of working with, as you say, the it's really the involuntary part of our movement. And in my case, I most recently, I'm in my final year of the Feldenkrais training. And so I kind of did it in the opposite order, which is I sort of got very familiar with the release and involuntary movements and processes that get connected to with TRE. And then I became curious about, well, what is the role of, if that's what involuntary processes look like when we know how to access it, is there a role for the refinement that is a little bit more top down? Because in Feldenkrais work, as you know, just as well as I do, it's not involuntary movements that we're interested in. We're interested in bringing a lot of attention and awareness to the subtlety contained at the level of voluntary movement, and an idea that perhaps there is a refinement that can be developed. Perhaps there is a more integrated self-image would be probably the word we'd use in Feldenkrais, that's sort of part of what's being developed. And so I kind of went from sort of the freewheeling, unstructured processes of myofascial unwinding and then TRE. And then I got interested in this other side, not because I think one is more important than the other, but in my case, because I thought there was perhaps something important about studying oneself through both angles, and you kind of did it the other way. And so I wonder for you, now at this stage of your career, working with people, what do you see as the role of something like Feldenkrais, more conscious type of explorations in relationship to TRE type, more deeply bottom up approaches. What's your thought on the relationship of those things?
I just want to add that when I did my Feldenkrais method training, I had actually already started doing the release work on my own. But I did a lot of Feldenkrais before that.
I see. Okay. I see.
But it's a very interesting question or topic. I would love to hear your experience as well.
Yeah.
So maybe I could interview you later about your how you experienced it.
Please, I would love to.
Yeah, great. But I think I think they greatly enhance each other, and I see that people who come to TRE or maybe even something like SE, and who don't have any type of experience that is somehow similar to Feldenkrais. It doesn't have to be Feldenkrais, even though I would say it's a great method for that particular kind of work. But it could be something like yoga. Some people get this something through like Tai Chi or other things where they actually have a focus on the body in movement and some awareness of themselves. I see that, for instance, people with a dance background, especially certain types of dance, like improvised dance, have a lot of this sort of ability to be with their body in the TRE process and explore and sort of really access that.
Sure.
But I see that when you add some elements from the Feldenkrais methods, more awareness, maybe trying out different movement explorations. I mean, and the Feldenkrais method has a huge range of movement explorations we can try out. You go deeper into or at least that's what I experience with myself and with the people I work with, that the TRE or the release experience deepen.
Right.
And we access more areas that suddenly become available for release. Yeah. As well as an increased integration after the release. Yeah. I also see that increased integration now allows for more release. So there's like a gradual shift upwards between sort of opening up and releasing, which it can actually be sort of somewhat disintegrating or opening up into the chaotic, where you then have some need to integrate and stabilize and return to something somewhat structured even. And the Feldenkrais method, I think greatly helps in that process. It's really interesting and useful to combine with TRE. Both sort of as separate methods, but also can blend them in sessions.
Totally. Yeah. Well, that really matches my own learning curve or the way that I'm thinking about it currently as well. And so I'm glad we're having this conversation. And what I'm realizing, Hans, is we should trade some sessions, perhaps, even if it's virtually. But anyway, because what I'm becoming so interested in is exactly that, the integration within a session, and my thought is the same in the sense of how I am facilitating one-on-one, well, and group, but especially one-on-one TRE these days in my in-person and especially my online clients is, if I have an hour, I often will spend the first 15 or 20, sometimes the full half hour of preparation, and I really lean into Feldenkrais principles. So doing a detailed body scan first, or doing or I even lean into somatic experiencing a little bit, doing a detailed sensory inventory of how's the breath, where is the sensation, where is there less sensation, and then after that sort of awareness-based inventory, I like to bring in subtle movement as we utilize in Feldenkrais, whether that's subtle movements of the head or the jaw, I often work through multiple joints in the body, head, neck, jaw, shoulders, the hip joint, doing all of them with small movements, with pauses to observe changes in the way that we do in a Feldenkrais awareness through movement lesson. And then I do the same type of process around breath and creating awareness. And so that whole process, this is all before we tremor. And so this might take 20, sometimes even 30 minutes. And what I feel happens is the person's, what they're paying attention to within their sensation is much increased. And also a lot of parasympathetic relaxation, a lot of somatic presence, a lot of waking up of the joints in the body have been primed. And then now we go into TRE for the second half hour or remaining 20 minutes or whatever it is. And my observation is that for people who have previously tremored a lot before, many new things happen when we have laid a foundation of all this detailed relaxation and exploration first. And it's as though oftentimes the tremoring is not quite as huge or as, quote unquote, violent, but that doesn't mean it's not potent. It might get more deeply into the bones or the muscles or the viscera. Not always, of course, but anyway, so this is my own, this is where I'm going these days with, as I study both of them. And so it sounds to me like that matches. I mean, I'm not saying your style is the same as mine, but it sounds like you're sensing that integration, maybe a little bit similarly to how I'm describing it. Does that match?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there are many ways of combining these methods, and definitely what you described is something I would do with some clients, and some. And both before a session, but also after a session to sort of more regulate down and integrate afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also possible to do these things while tremoring. So, for instance, focusing on particular parts of the body, or just simple things like, let's say you do the things you mentioned, like moving the jaw or the head while tremoring. I guess you have done this as well.
Sure.
And sure. And I mean, there are so many different things that can be explored there. Also with the the basic TRE standing exercises, I find that using some of these principles can be greatly enhanced as well, both to achieve more grounding, more connectedness from the feet and up through the legs and into the pelvis and into the upper body. To connect. I find that quite a lot of people, while doing the TRE exercises, find it difficult to support the upper body, or sort of to ground the upper body on the legs properly.
Yeah.
If you could say that the feet ground the body on the floor.
Yeah.
But on top of that, you have the lower part of the leg and the knee and the thigh bone and so on. And if that structure is sort of somehow not well integrated or loose in some way or not well coordinated, the connection to the pelvis and the hip joint and so on can sort of create a sense of unsafety. Actually, a lot of this for the upper body, and with holding the breath, increased stiffness and so on.
Right.
And while doing some simple sort of adjustments or explorations and so on with the standing exercise, specifically the calf raise, and so I don't do the third exercise with the hands on the floor, but more as a one-legged squat, you could say, to especially enhance this sense of groundedness and support.
Yeah.
Not just on the floor, but actually of the leg, sort of support of the leg for the upper body.
Sure.
to increase safety and so on internally. And
Yeah.
that has huge effects, I find, both for tremoring in standing, but also for when we go to the floor. So and just for general, I think the TRE exercises, but adding a few of these ideas from the Feldenkrais method and the skeletal alignment, not in this sort of idea of straightness, but with the idea of support.
Yeah, connectedness. No.
Yeah.
Well, I love that. It's sort of like the Feldenkraisian concept. It's like, does the head know that it's supported on the neck? Does the neck know that it's connected to the spine beneath it? Does the spine recognize that it's being supported by the pelvic basin? Does the pelvic basin recognize its relationship to the top of the thigh bone? Does the thigh bone feel its connection to the knee, the lower legs, the ankle, and the feet? And so, and you're totally correct. This idea of in Feldenkrais, do we realize in an experiential way that these connections are there and that our access to the ground, and I love your use of the word support, can be felt, can be experienced in a very direct way. And I think you're onto something that when we have anxiety patterns or patterns of defense or patterns of simply of disconnection, very often in the upper body, closer to our cerebral experience, if we may know intellectually that our feet are on the ground and that's but if we can't feel that through our skeleton in a direct way, then we carry unnecessary tension and parasitic tension, as we would say in Feldenkrais. I'm really liking the reminder of that language about, can we really find support all the way down through the skeleton?
Yeah. If you look at the calf raise, I find that particularly interesting, because if you look at quite a few, or at your clients, maybe in a group, I guess you might have seen that for some people, the raising of the calf doesn't really raise the upper body, because the knee now goes forward, or somehow there is the movement up of the calf doesn't travel directly up through the leg and into the upper body. And that, to me, is often indicative of there's a lack of connectedness there, and that quite a few people can't really find and support their whole body weight on one foot, and even less on the ball of the feet. And helping them find that, which is not all that hard, greatly enhances the TRE experience.
Totally.
Because a lot of what you mentioned, the tension patterns, the holding, when you feel unsafe and unbalanced over your feet and not supported by the leg, when you sort of create the support, or you help them find the support, a lot of that tension can sort of a little bit give way, and then more things can happen also higher up in the body quite easily, because all of that sort of holding and tensing from the lack of Well,
and
so
what
I find that hugely interesting. So and very practical. It's not just it's very practical and directly possible to experience and see both from the outside, but also be felt from the inside.
Right. Well, and what I'm thinking about, what I'm realizing right now in this conversation is, I described to you one of the ways that I'm with the thing I've been exploring, right? Doing some detailed Feldenkrais work, then going into TRE, and exactly bringing some of those same subtle movements during the tremoring process, and how rich that's been. But what I'm realizing right now in this conversation is that what I haven't been doing a lot of yet is on the integration side. So meaning after the tremoring, I mean, sure, I have people integrate and stand and feel how things are, but as we're talking, I'm recognizing that that's another step where after the release process, the involuntary, the tremor mechanism, that there's I'm probably missing an opportunity to do more detailed connecting of back into the voluntary movement system through something like Feldenkrais or whatever. As we transition back more into functional activity like standing, walking, moving around. And so I'm thinking to myself, oh, I need to be doing more, bringing more of the Feldenkrais on the back end of the tremoring experiences as well. So anyway, just thought I'd share that.
Yeah. Yes, I have some thoughts on that, because I think so a session often is 1 hour. Maybe I sometimes actually have 1.5 hour or even 2 hours, but mostly 1 hour sessions.
Right.
And especially when clients get to be a little bit more advanced, you could say, they have more experience.
Sure.
Maybe they practice some Feldenkrais or yoga or other methods at home.
Yeah.
Then we could look at this process not as just something happening in the 1 hour session where they are with us, but that they actually can do some of that. I mean, the question would also be how much tremoring and how much release should you do?
True.
And then,
True. Yeah.
And then if that is the part that they find challenging to work with at home, maybe we should spend more time with that in the session, and then they do more of the integration and so on on their own with the body, sort of more like the Feldenkrais style work or things like that. Or but I mean, there are so many ways of doing it with different clients, and but definitely doing. Yeah, I've done that also, of course, quite a lot with some Feldenkrais after a session, or especially after a longer sort of a course, like a full day and so on. Then I do that even more actually at the end.
Got it.
But
Yeah. No, I love that.
I mean, there are lots of different ways of working with integration. So it's great to just share ideas. This is not.
I totally agree. And there's. No, it's a rich intersection. Well, I wonder if we could make a transition, because I want to save time for hearing about you bringing your awareness around nervous system regulation into the educational context and the context of families and children, which is clearly a big passion of yours. And you've developed several models that are very useful, and you've used some language that is a little bit new for me. In addition to self-regulation and co-regulation, you talk about supported regulation and auto-regulation. And so I would just love to hear, and our listeners as well, how do you take these nervous system principles into the conflict resolution and communication work that you're doing with children and families?
Yes. So when working with children, families, so mostly then I work with the parents when working with communication and conflict resolution, and what we can call regulation support. So I'm also then, because sometimes I work with the children as well, maybe even doing some TRE and so on. But that's and when that works and the children are interested in it, it has very, very good effects, because children are more neuroplastic and they are earlier in their development, so their patterns of defense and holding and trauma are not so ingrained, you could say.
Sure.
So, but it requires that the children actually are interested and willing to come to the office and do these things and so on. But mostly I work then with the parents to help them understand more about these processes. Sometimes I teach even TRE to the parents. But mostly my work in that area is focused on teaching what we call regulation, supportive communication, and conflict resolution. Basically, let's say you are a parent or you work in a kindergarten or in school. There are a lot of different situations where there might be a difference of opinion, you can call it, between the child and the adult about what is supposed to be done or how we want to do things. So at home, typically, it could be, so in our time, it could be turning off a screen, of course, a TV or an iPad or computer or something like that, and to either come to the dinner table or do some help with doing some chores, or it could be going to bed and brushing the teeth and so on first, and or getting out of the house in the morning. I mean, there are lots of examples, so we don't need to go through all of them. And now, of course, the children might object, not want to listen to the parent or the adult in the kindergarten or the school. And often these situations can lead to quite severe escalations, either emotionally with either a parent or both, also the child being more angry or afraid even, or insecure, or become very sad. And we can even have situations where the fight-flight mechanisms or even freeze reactions are triggered, and so on. And so the question now is, how can we as adults relate to the children in these type of situations in a way where we partly get what we want to get done when we actually get things done, you could say. So that's one aim. But we also want to do it in a way where we help support the development of the children's self-regulation capacity, including their communication skills and conflict resolution skills and problem-solving skills, you could say. And to this aim, sort of, I've developed several models to help adults, and all of these models are focused on the adult. A lot of the models in sort of this field of children, relationships with children, and so on, are focused on the child in some way. Okay. Even though it's sort of positively focused for most of these models, it's sort of focused on the child. Of course, there are many models that also teach about conflict resolution and communication in different ways. But so then I've developed something I call the PLS framework. So the PLS stands for Positive Learning Spirals, and it's a set of models that is meant to help adults learn more about regulation support and how to communicate in a way that supports the children's self-regulation. So you probably, of course, you know the term co-regulation and self-regulation, but regulation support is a somewhat new term. It was first used by, as far as I know, by some Norwegian, a professor in psychology and another co-author of him in a book about relational trauma. And the idea here is that when the child is outside their own capacity to self-regulate, or outside the window of tolerance, we could say as well. Of course, then often the use co-regulation is used for this term. But I find that the term regulation support is much more useful here in this context. I find that co-regulation is very well suited for more situations where there is more existing harmony, you could say, and where the child is somehow within their capacity to self-regulate or window of tolerance. But when we come outside of that, the situation really now is not really about the child co-regulating. Now the child can't co-regulate. It cannot participate in co-regulation. And this is where we as adults now can learn about how we can provide regulation support to in a situation where that is actually quite challenging to do, but very possible to learn how to do it quite well. So go ahead if you.
Well, I'm just thinking. I mean, I really like that distinction between that co-regulation happens when the child or the adult's nervous system is available for that. But then if the availability isn't there, then you're in a different situation. And I'm kind of it, and I smiled because it reminded me the first time I met Stephen Porges in a Zoom room, which was preparing for a TRE summit, and it was just him and myself and one other person. And so we were meeting for the first time, and he had kind of an agenda, but he said, no, wait. We have to take a moment to get to know each other, and I need to hear where you are. I just need to know a little bit about you, and vice versa. And then it only took a few minutes, and then he said, now we're available to each other. Now my nervous system is available to yours, and yours is available to mine. All right, what do we need to plan for this meeting? And so to me, it was just sort of an example of where, in awareness of sensing it, are we in a co-regulatory relationship? And if not yet, now that's a different example because there was no adversity or anything like that. But I'm really liking that concept as you're relating it to children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also I could tell you a little bit about one of these models.
Sure. Yeah, please.
Yeah, which I call a PLS regulation support model. And it basically describes 5 phases of regulation supportive conflict resolution. And I actually have it here on my wall. I have these models on my wall here.
Perfect.
So only those who are on video or observing this on video can see the wall.
Perfect.
But those who are listening on the podcast might probably not see or will not see it.
Yeah.
But they are visual models that are to make it easy to explain and remember. But this 5-phase model, PLS regulation support model, focus on first of all, what we call adult action intentions in each of these 5 phases. A lot of different conflicts resolution models out there with different phases of conflicts. So I won't go into the theoretical details of all the differences in the models, but
just start with the basics for today. Yeah.
So the first phase is prepare and involve phase. And in this phase, we are looking at all the different things we as adults can do before we will start or initiate any type of activity to make whatever we are going to do. Let's say we're going shopping with a 3-year-old in a grocery store. These stores, they are made to be traps for children, to also for adults actually to buy stuff,
candy and juice boxes,
ice cream and all that stuff. and now we can look at all the things we can do before we go into the store to make the journey through the store work better.
Okay.
Or let's say you're a teacher, before you start a class, the different things we can do before we're starting to make the process go easier. Or let's say even a football game between kids, is there something we as adults can do before we start to make the game more enjoyable and less prone to fights or conflicts of some type.
Sure.
And then of course, and that's the easy phase because that mostly happens before we actually start something.
Okay.
So the next phase starts when we are initiating whatever we are going to do and want to lead and complete the activity.
Okay.
And for instance, walking through the whole store and getting out and back in the car again.
Right.
So. And I call that phase the lead and stabilize phase. So the leading aspect is related to all the different things we as adults can do to actually create progress and get things done and move the child along with us in the process. And the stabilizing aspect is relating to leading in such a way that we don't escalate the situation unnecessarily. There are many ways of leading that can escalate the situation by the nature of how the adult leads. So we're looking at those things to understand the dynamic of those. But of course, the child completely on the child's own sort of will, you could say, regardless of our theoretically best attempts at at leading. Will, of course, sometimes or quite often even have their own initiatives, their own will, their own things they want to do,
Right.
things they would like to have in the store, or things like this. Even though we have prepared and agreed maybe on some rules of
Right.
the journey or something like that. And then now it's related to how do we as the adult respond to the objections of the child or the different requests they might have, and so on. And to do this in a way that doesn't further escalate the situation. So that's the stabilizing aspect of it. And then the third phase is, of course, when we learn to do things quite well in these two first phases, we will often experience that the third phase, which is the de-escalate and comfort phase. And that's the phase where the third phase is where the emotions become more intense and stronger. And also the behaviors, more like bad language or even physical aggression or threats and so on, might appear. If we work well in the two first phases,
right,
the third phase will often happen less often and become less intense, mostly.
Okay.
Especially over time, as we work with this process over repeated sort of learning loops, you could say. Then,
sure.
But still, we will end up in the third phase, at least with quite a few children, and especially those who need more support than others. So we need to understand the dynamics of de-escalation, and both on a behavioral level and on an emotional level, as well as comforting, because there are different things happening in that phase that requires different, of course, and that's in all phases, different sort of emphases. And then the fourth phase is a repair and acknowledge phase. And because in the previous two phases, especially when there is sort of more intense feelings involved, there might be a sense of a distance and coldness, or maybe some type of negative emotions in the relationship. And the idea now is to do things that create more of a sense of closeness again, and a sense that the relationship is okay, you could say.
Okay.
There's a range of things that can be done there.
Sure.
And then in the fifth phase, that's a reflect and dialogue phase. So the reflect part is related to our own reflection and thinking through the situation, what happened, what we can do differently ourselves in each phase as the adult. And the dialogue aspect is related to involving the child in what we can call a problem-solving dialogue. And this whole process of these 5 phases is then thought of as a repeated process where we're trying to create positive learning loops or spirals. So that's the name of the model, PLS, positive learning spirals, where we sort of gradually work to increase the co-regulation and regulation support capacity of the diet, or sort of these, partly the self-regulation of the child, but also the self-regulation of ourselves as adults through increased understanding and skills in the dynamics of these processes of conflict resolution and so on.
Wow.
And the idea now is that this also over time helps the child increase their self-regulation as well as co-regulation capacity. So
wonderful. I mean, I'm What I was going to share is that so as a new parent, right? We have a 15-month-old, and she, Lily, and she's not speaking fully yet, but she's in that age of toddlerness, and she's just in week by week we're seeing the changes in her always there's the need for connection, but there's more increase, asserting her independence, and we're getting an early taste of some of the the phases that come up in toddlerhood and whatnot. But as I'm listening, I'm thinking to myself, man, this is probably in a year or two, I'm going to be calling you, Hans, and I'm going to say, okay, I think I know about regulation, but I'm being challenged with my daughter. Help me understand where's my barrier here. So I'm really just appreciating listening to the framework itself.
Great. I do actually have an online course in English, actually, on this model. So I'm happy to give you access, and you can have a look. And
perfect.
Maybe giving me some feedback when you have tested it out with your daughter.
Well, yeah. Well, so I was gonna ask you. So I know you teach courses and you likely teach groups. TRE for sure. But for this model, do you do a lot of work one-on-one or with the parents? Is this also a part of your work?
I do individual sessions with individual parents or sort of two parents. I do courses for parents, but also in kindergartens and schools. Mm-hmm. And I also have a training program in this model or this framework, you could say, over 1 year. It is now becoming a 2-year program. Mm-hmm. And that's mostly for professionals working in schools or kindergartens, but some parents also attend because they find it very interesting and useful. Of course, many of the professionals are also parents or even foster parents. So this model is actually being applied and used today in Norwegian schools and kindergartens. And they have really, really great results with very challenging situations and cases in their schools and kindergartens.
Wonderful.
It's very fun to work with.
Wonderful, good, and we'll be sure, of course, to include. We'll include all the links to these different your website and models and ways to find all of this in the show notes below. Hans, this has been. I know we need more time to go. I'm sure we could spend another hour or two easily, but to me, this has just been a really lovely overview, because I've been curious about how you're incorporating these different things. So really nice to have this conversation today.
Yeah, it's been absolutely wonderful. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk. We did in our previous call talk about doing sort of a 3-hour Joe Rogan style podcast.
Right.
You probably have more than enough to talk about to do something like that. But,
we'll look forward to evolving in that long form direction. We'll see. Very cool. Well, good. Well, Hans, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Alex. It's great meeting you again and having this conversation.
Great. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Red Beard Embodiment Podcast. To learn more, visit us at redbeardsomatictherapy.com or send me an email at alex@redbeardsomatictherapy.com. If today's conversation resonated with you, help spread the word by subscribing and sharing with others. Hope to see you next time.